Welcome to Blitzscaling Yourself. We're joined by Ross Fubini, who's a venture capital investor at XYZ Ventures. Ross is an engineer, first and foremost, which is why I wanted to talk to him. That means, Ross, you're able to think about systems more clearly than almost anybody, and especially in venture, which is not an engineering-driven business. You're also a triathlete. Ross, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to caveat, I think there are some great engineers among our venture brethren. If it's not quite the norm, I would agree with that, though.
And you and I kind of are connected because your previous fund invested in my previous business, although we never met. And you know my co-host, Chris Ye. How do you know Chris?
So first, Chris and I are both old, and we've been around the Bay Area a long time. And so happily we've got intersected a couple different ways. Most notably, Chris and I both gravitate towards exceptional, brilliant, kind people. In this case, we're both quite close to Reid Hoffman. Chris has written a book with Reid. Reid is the founder of LinkedIn. And Reid is a friend of mine, an LP of mine, and was a really wonderful catalyst in creating Village Global, one of the venture funds that I ran. And so Chris and I got to know each other in that context. We do not spend enough time together, which is much to my detriment, but he's really an exceptional person and really just knows exceptional people.
Well, and people, the fans of our podcast will know that the book one of the books Chris and Reid wrote was Blitzscaling, which is what this podcast is named after. Actually, do you know Aria Finger, who's Reid's? So she's Reid's current chief of staff.
Okay, no, I don't think I know Aria.
So she's the next guest that I'm interviewing.
Oh, that's terrific. So you have to ask her how she organizes. We were talking a little while ago about frameworks, and I think the volume of ideas that Reid has. I think he's such an interesting person because the volume of ideas get translated to these multiple lenses. And I think an interesting part of being around and working with people like that is how do you help them improve those lenses. So not just, hey, I'm here to help execute this way we're already doing something, but how do I make it better? And that's a fun thing to get to do. We do a lot of that internally here at XYZ at our venture firm. It's like we have these lenses and ideas, and we're always sort of going back and saying what are strategies for either tuning them up a little bit or throwing them out the window and getting whole new ones.
That's interesting. You probably haven't spent a lot of time looking at my background, but the reason I think why I get along so well with Ben Casnoka, who is our probably closest common connection, is because we both worked as a chief of staff for somebody. So I was kind of like the right-hand man to a political leader in Canada, who's one of the main political leaders. I started as an engineer in that party, and then I kind of like rose up the ranks into less technical stuff. And I had this exact challenge, which was, so Tom, my boss, is like super, super smart, and but lacked structure. And a lot of what I would do is be kind of like a strategy, like a kind of a combination of like a doer of like executing the things and helping him think them through and structure them.
And it's a real challenge also, because I think one of the things that makes so many people successful is the strengths of these frameworks, but also how do you go change, refresh these frameworks is continually making them better. I think is a hard thing to figure out, because like it's in the direction of like the things that got you here are not necessarily the things that are gonna get you to that next stage. So maybe another setting, because I don't want to be reveal too much. I'm curious who the political leader was. So.
Oh, there's a guy called Tom Mulcair, who's a leader of the opposition in Canada for the left-wing party. It's a New Democratic Party. So this is another thing I have in common with Ben. I dropped out of university to work as the first kind of engineering hire for this political party. We built out the data science team and infrastructure for them. And I was like 18. It was a really cool opportunity.
That's an incredible experience. I grew up in Virginia, just outside of DC, and so I've always had these political awarenesses. And I think, like so many people who grew up there, originally thought pursue politics would be in my life. I'm also with this view that the farther you go in life, like well, you know what job I do not want is is actually being the person that is suffering these slings and arrows, let alone the legislative process that it takes to get things done in many good democratic environments.
It's a great job when you're very young. So for me, like, for example, I connected Ben to a couple of potential LPs, one who's the founder of BlackBerry, and the other who's essentially just a Canadian billionaire who does stuff. And the reason I know them is that I know them through politics. They're donors.
Yeah.
So you really do, like, it is useful when you're 20. I mean, most people do it in their early 20s. I did it in my late teens. But okay, so I want to talk about your background, and we have a bunch of questions. And there's actually one of the questions that's a good intro to your background and a good segue into it. So here's a question from Max Colgan. And the question is, have you met Einstein? So maybe give a little bit of background about why he would ask that question.
Well, the main reason you would ask that question is my great-grandfather is a guy named Guido Fubini, and he has notably two things. One, he has an amazing mustache. If you look up Guido Fubini or on Wikipedia, or you go to my website for our venture firm, XYZ.vc, there's a picture of Guido. It's my great-grandfather. In addition to the mustache, he was the primary mathematician that worked with Einstein at the Institute for Advanced Study. And for those applied math nerds among us, he invented something called the Fubini theorem. And it's a pretty commonly used theorem. It's not quite the power law, but in 3D calc, you use it as part of doing integral work in non-Euclidean or curved space. So he's a really exceptional guy. I did not meet Einstein as a function of being born in 1976 and, him being dead. I'm sure Einstein's dead by then, I think. Interestingly, relevant to this, in my grandfather, who I did know very well, also an incredibly notable person. He was Assistant Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and Johnson. He started ARPA and DARPA, the Defense Science Board, first outside president of IBM, really spoke 12 languages, really a tremendous person. And I'll tell you, there's another idea in math called the regression to the mean. It means that the next instance of something is going to be closer to the average. And I feel like that is just cutting into me and my children as we drift towards the bottom of accomplishments, in hopes that there's a grandchild or great grandchild that's going to pop back up. But we come from truly remarkable people.
So this is thank you, Max, because this was a really great segue into you, Ross. So maybe tell us about your childhood. What was it like to grow up, near DC, surrounded by these truly exceptional people at a period where people are doing truly exceptional things, and how did you make your way into venture afterwards?
So there's two things. I'll tell you, a personal thing and something that's more leading into my own professional work. The personal thing is, I think, so as I said, I was born in 76, and I can now see in retrospect, I was born at a time when it was a big deal that Bill Gates was, on the cover of a magazine. It's really those rise of the nerds. And maybe this is similar for folks here. Maybe it's different. Like I did, whether it was BBS's or early Prodigy or or Moogs, or so many parts of assembling my first 4 meg expansion video card so I could play Wing Commander. Those were all very nerdy parts of my background. Meanwhile, my family mostly has a lot of animals. We had in the 20s at that time, more now, of dogs, 20 plus, now 40s and on, and also ferrets and gooses and parrots and potbelly pigs. And so my life is always full of a cacophony of activity. And one of the things that I was always, as a young person, anchored in was this awareness of my grandfather. And because he was such a, he's your grandfather at that time, an older person, but like so mathematically smart. So much so if you would drive by and be like, well, seems like you've been at school today, like what's that's the integral of cosine. You're like, that's not nice, and I forgot. Like it's like, and he was that was a math and engineering were a big part of my life, almost in a reflection of all the other things going on in my family. Growing up outside of DC, I was fortunate then to be able to go explore that through engineering. And then I went to school down in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. And I ultimately trained as a computer scientist, and then was very, very fortunate. This is in '97 to come out originally and work for Netscape, the original browser company. But for those that don't know, before Chrome and Safari and all these things, actually a precursor, what was later open source Mozilla, Netscape was the creator of the first commercial browser. And to spend just 1 second there on it being such a unique place, Netscape was really and truly creating the internet. When I was there, I worked on the browser and different security servers, and there was another team that was 5 cubes down of 4 folks, really nice people. We eventually sold that small business, I believe, and that was the proxy server team, and that was basically the beginning of the CDN market. The tens of billions of dollars of value was coming from these small number of people with this idea of how do you make the internet faster with caching. Similar with the Tim House's LDAP team that became the Active Directory standard. So really an incredible place where parts of the internet were being invented. I remember when friends that were working with Mark Andreessen at the time were some of the first people to really pay attention to the fact that the business was not the browser, wasn't necessarily the servers, but the website was going to be a big deal. And that was non-obvious at the time. It's again, because we were building just so many different parts of the internet that didn't exist. And so a really strong formative experience. My sort of second sort of element, if the first was about this core engineering, really fell the path of networks into leadership in engineering and running bigger teams. And so coming out of the Netscape diaspora, there's a company called Tell Me, which is an implementation of the same internet concepts, but to call centers and what's called an IVR, interactive voice response. And that business ended up being eventually sold for about $1 billion to Microsoft, but really was exceptional because of the technologists that left Netscape to go be part of that business. People like JG, who now runs AI for Tim Cook, Mike McHugh that ran Flipboard, Emil Michaels worked there, Alfred Lin, like really such this talented group. And so you're following that talent, which another company called Plumtree has a similar illustrious history. The CEO of Redfin, the president of Atlassian, all these people coming out of this happy network. And then I ran along with other folks, a division of Symantec, the security company, which is tremendous scale and tremendous fun. And then I started a company in the enterprise collaboration space.
I'm really curious about this. So my great grandfather was, very wealthy, and like there are like boulevards in Canada, and there's like schools and like tour districts named after him. I never met him, right? But he did have a huge influence on the other people in my family, like my father, who did meet him, and his like the whole family. How how would you qualify, like what is your mental model around what it means to have a figure like that in your family? Like is it empowering? Because
Yeah.
I find in a way it's like, for when I look at my father, people in his generation, it's in a sense disempowering. In another way it's not, right? In another way it is empowering. Like how do you understand that?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because I can see it through parts of my mom and the my aunts and uncle. This thing you're describing, um, of they've accomplished so much. How am I ever going to measure up, or what will I measure up? And these are fundamentally also very human quits. My mom, you know, like they're out. You know, like how do you identity and love of your parents and accomplishments. I will tell you, in my experience, I really do feel them as motivating, in the form of I am in the shadow of these people that accomplish so much intellectually, that everything I'm doing is like an echo of that, but it's not of that level. Um, because what they did was just so defining in their category. Now, I have the benefit, I feel that I'm not trying to be the equivalent. I'm not hunting for either exactly in their industry. I'm not an academic, um, or even to their level of glory isn't the right word, but the thing I've come away with is I have like only three goals in my life, and one of them is to just like my grandfather is to acquire wisdom to help people, because I feel like that's what he did. When I knew him as my grandfather, in the later part of his career, people would come to the house, the former assistant secretary, secretary to SecDev, and other people in that industry would come to go walk with him, and he would counsel them and give them advice. And it's because he was genuinely wise, the way that all of us might have like those wise people in their life. And I think that's the thing that I'm spending my whole professional career trying to do, is learn enough so then you can be helpful and wise for others. So that's the actual manifestation that I have.
It is interesting because it feels like there's this, like you were born in, or you kind of grew up with an acceptance that there are people in the world who excel more than you most likely will, right? Like, so let's say for me, will I ever be as accomplished as Mark Zuckerberg? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
And they're just, it's actually really difficult to wrap your head around this concept. And it sounds like, you grew up with an understanding of that. And that's a tremendously empowering thing. Because in fact, what Mark Zuckerberg excels at is understanding that other people are better than him and bringing them in to empower himself.
Yeah. Yeah, I also think that this comes along with being a professional in this industry for a while, because I think part of this is this commentary ends up being about money, or it could be about fame or impact picture proxy words. And what I feel is I know numerous people in the industry. So let's not talk about people that are different profession, whether they're artists, nurses, like many other dimensions. But you're like, I'm trying to be successful here. I know many people that are wonderful, insightful, deep, thoughtful, ambitious folks who just didn't stumble into the right set of choices. And just like everybody else, I know just as many, whether they were joined the right company or went to the right school, they stumbled, like they're like a clown car driving into a gold mine. And even if they're not bad people, they're not exceptional people. And so it's taken a lot away of all that kind of stress for me, or that kind of that. And instead, the ambition is very raw, and it's mine. And then the manifestation is when I choose. So most of my professional ambition really comes from truly wanting to get this path of wisdom for me, which is about experience and exposure. And then second, it really and truly is rooted in helping other people. It happens that the way that we do the venture craft, that becomes an economic benefit, and that's outstanding. And it has economic leverage greater than someone that enjoys helping people through being a one-on-one teacher. And that's, we could talk about that in society, but that's my actual experience. Like, it allows me to unhook. Most days we all have you want the, fly around the private jet all the time days, but it mostly unhooks me from that and lets me feel great about my ambition to get this wisdom, and then the path of doing it through working with the people. And it's nice that it pays the bills in the process.
So what is the qualitative difference between when the internet was started and where we are now with, let's say, AI and Web3? And the reason I ask you this is, A, you were there and the internet started. I wasn't. And B, you were involved in the internet company, right? Netscape is like the initial IPO that launched that whole, late 90s thing. Like, how did things feel then, or what was different then? And is it different from, let's say, how things are with AI and Web3 today? And how so, and what's the insight there?
It's different. I'll give you two examples, and they're almost like two sides of the same coin. One I feel so differently is that the internet was just not. So it's the early days of the internet. Early days of internet adoption. First, like let's do all the caveats for all the literalists out there. The internet's coming earlier in the late 60s and 70s, and we're figuring out our supercomputers. But the adoption, the consumer awareness, is that it was really a secret. People didn't understand how big it was going to be, big deal it was going to be, and how it was going to manifest in our lives. Some because it was so new, it didn't fully exist in a high quality way. We still had the blink tag with all of its powers and websites. So the hints of the idea of an eBay, picking our different points in time, enabling commerce, were coming along. But all these things were very new, and they were new secrets, and people were figuring out where there was a business that made sense. They were figuring out like what technology was going to be valuable. They had like a theory, and it was relatively a small set of people that believed it, and most people were actually indifferent in the world, and your friends and other people you knew. Now my experience is that this is the first part that's different, is that this stuff is widely known, and so there are a lot of opinions about it. Period. There are a lot of opinions about whether it's good or bad, and should you regulate AI today. There are opinions about the leaders in these fields, good and bad, whether Zuck or Lon, or sort of pick your sort of rubric. And so there's a lot more noise in people's in my and company development universe. So that's a big difference, I feel. The second thing is, because of this, because of the this, so these are like platform level change, the way that Netscape was, the way that Facebook was. We argue about crypto or AI, these potential huge shifts when they occur because of all that noise. There's many, many, many people drawn to those things very quickly. And some of that could be, the silliness of speculation in crypto coins, or people being drawn to that activity. And right now, to your point of AI and LLMs, we have so many people drawn to it. Some people have really great ideas, some people have terrible ideas. That's one part. Some part is that the platforms are moving, so that all these people are attracted to it, but the platforms keep moving forward. And the platforms are going to roll over people. They're going to roll over ideas. They're going to roll over business. They're going to make whole businesses when GPT-5 comes out, like, our business didn't make sense at all. And so this is a function of, it's not the speed, it's moving at the same speed in some ways, but the number of people kind of involved is a really different feeling. It makes for a different venture, a different founding experience as well. So that's not a technical thing, but that's the ecosystem you're building in and how it's being observed by others. And also, to go back to one idea you introduced, whether you feel like you're doing something unique and special. In the former case, you felt super weird. I'm over here building, whether it's a infrastructure piece or a website. People are like, that's not a business. What are you doing? You're not a serious person. Go get a real job. Go be a banker. And now we almost have the opposite extreme of people trying to figure out, am I building something that's really valuable, or am I just like one of a dozen, 2 dozen, 20, 50 companies falling in a YC building a dev tool,
Is that so? Is that in a way something that suppresses? So when you describe it, it feels like something that should push people to innovate more and be more weird, right? So say, hey, look, if I build a SaaS tool that does whatever, like that's lame. Nobody cares. Like, come on, do something real. On the other hand, like do something innovative and interesting. On the other hand, it does feel, and I wasn't around in the 90s. I mean, I was super young. It does feel like the opposite is true. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the this is not accurate. But what's your thought on that?
So my thought, two things. One, to your point, I think it's a signal to noise thing. Here, there's so much in this camp now. There's much more noise. It's a much more active system, and some of those things are credible, and some of them are not, and some of them are like complete BS because they're on Hacker News, and some of them are really good because they're on Hacker News, and the same thing in the New York Times. So there's like both the cacophony of communication about it, but it's all about signal to noise. My hope is when you get complex systems, all that signal noise is going on, is you ultimately do get better ideas that come out of it. But if you imagine it visually, instead of you've got all this activity raging, some good and some bad, but something gets velocity and then emerges as a new and interesting idea. And we can see elements of that starting to show up now. I'll give you a trivial one that's emerging as a norm, which is like the use of LLMs in customer support. Maybe Intercom is a good example of this. Intercom is a plugin that goes on your website that does customer support. They plugged in ChatGPT and it made their product better quickly. I use that not to say that Intercom is brilliant, but to say the opposite. You could very quickly integrate this new technology into your existing business. And I think people are realizing that quickly. They're getting sort of shallow benefits because they're not rebuilding everything. But it's a really interesting example that there's all this activity, and that can become the emerging norm. They're like, oh, everybody should do this. If you're not doing that, that's the baseline. The use of a Copilot doing development would be another example. Like if you're a developer listening to this and if you haven't used Copilot at least a bit, like you're missing a tool in the toolbox. And now, should you be building an amazing plugin to Copilot? Probably not. Git's probably going to do that. Like, but that's what I mean. Like the signal to noise is higher. So the founders, a VC, that's a different kind of job versus, we have other areas where there's maybe not enough good companies, but boy, there's a big opportunity there.
And then one of the challenges that you describe is because there's so many people who are focused on, IT or, what's called tech, you essentially get brainwashed by all of these people who are really outsiders. Like they're not founders, they're not like true investors. It's just like this whole ecosystem, and it's very easy to get drawn into it, right? So the kind of stereotypical thing is people read TechCrunch and they, get business ideas and reading TechCrunch, right?
Yeah.
How do you protect yourself from that dynamic? Like it would seem that the move would be to just not be in Silicon Valley, but that also sounds wrong. I don't know what your take is on it.
Oh, I have two. So I have two thoughts about that. The first is this. So that doesn't trouble me that much day to day. I have kind of this very view that I want. I don't know. Every let's just say in the founder example, I want every company, every founder to be successful, even if their idea is a bit silly at times, or like, hey, this is probably not a great idea. It's fine. I want, that I might not invest in that, or I might not want to spend more time with that person, or I might down signal someone that introduced me to that person, like, oh, that's very real. But I don't have a strong opinion about that. That doesn't make me feel bad. The second thing that I think is that I don't run away from it, where I don't think it's necessarily the case that people that don't read those things, that aren't plugged in, don't have aren't a good source for a great company, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to build a company or move to. I mean, I live in San Francisco. I'm not trying to move to Miami. I'm not trying to make those shifts because I don't think that advantages you. If that makes sense, I think you can still be very successful without changing these circumstances.
Interesting. So I'm going to ask you one last audience question because we only got one, but we have a bunch. But here's an interesting one. So from Michael Chijoke. And Michael's question is, from your experience, should everyone working in a startup be under 25? What are the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, so first of all, the data will say to you that they shouldn't be, particularly because repeat founders, which are usually older founders, are more likely to be successful, period. So if you want to, create a successful company or be in a successful company, there are probably people that are older just by definition of that experience pathway. And my own lived experience is that age is not a good indicator overall of success. Mostly what's been a good indicator and a value into companies is, are people learning machines? And that learning machine could be, hey, this is my first job and I'm 3 months in, but I've learned how to develop faster or work with product management for the first time, or how to add design skills into my repertoire so that I can do front-end development more quickly because I can do the design on my own. That's all learning. Another learning could be like, hey, in companies that I've seen be successful after failing in my previous company, they thought about distribution and go to market early. And in fact, I'm going to build a multiplayer motion into my companies early on, and that's going to be part of how I'm going to be successful.
Okay, this is a good segue into our topic. So what I'm going to do is reintroduce you so that this becomes more clippable, and then ask you a question, and I'll segue off what you just said here, which is, I'll just ask you why it's so important for people to be learning machines.
Okay.
So welcome to Blitzscaling yourself. I'm joined by Ross Fubini, venture capital investor, XYZ Ventures. Ross is an engineer first. He thinks about systems very clearly. Ross is a triathlete. Ross is an all-around, very impressive guy. Welcome, Ross.
Thanks so much for having me.
So our topic is being a learning machine and different ways that different people learn. Let's start by asking you, what does it mean to be a learning machine, and why is it so important as a founder?
Well, first, I suppose we're all learning machines as humans, right? It's the thing the brain is good at, is you have experience and you change your action based on that experience, maybe to make yourself more successful or more joyful, or seeking of food or whatever kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think professionally, we could also argue personally as well, but certainly professionally, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, the reason that being a learning machine matters so much is because it makes you flexible to deal with both the discovery process. You're trying to find a problem worth solving, how to solve that problem. And it helps you deal with the positive feedback of, this company is really working. I need to scale and grow. I'm going to hire these executives. They want to join. I'm going to keep making revenue stack up. And also the negative signals. I've got to be much more efficient. That great co-founder I brought in, they're leaving. And being able to be ultimately resilient to all those positive and negative situations, and then to be able to take advantage of them. That's what learning machines are able to do. I think every single successful company you'll see has this at their root, is their ability of that individuals and that culture to learn, and that enables them to create a novel product and then figure out the way to scale it, and over time survive in all different markets, all different types.
And would you say that, so there's a dynamic about learning, which is it enables you to do things that you don't yet know how to do, right? So
Yep.
let's say when I started my first company, I had no idea how to do sales, and I figured out how to do sales.
Yeah.
And there's something tremendously beneficial about having people who embody your company culture and embody just how and know your company, who are able to do these tasks, at least to set them up at first before you can bring in experts. To what extent, like, what's the role of that in, the importance for founders to be learning machines?
Yeah. So I think founding companies and them scaling is maybe the best example of learning machines we have in the professional world. And it's because you are taking an idea you've got, you're trying to figure out as a founder, usually not one thing, but everything it takes to make that company be successful. You need to figure out what to build it, sell it, and as you scale up, all the specialization that's behind those ideas of building it at scale, testing it for quality, marketing it, selling it across different environments, different go-to-market channels. And that's the whole journey of the company. As a founder, what I've seen is in your earliest days, you have to be a learning machine to figure out what you should build to begin with. And so, being expert in that enables you to figure out something worth doing. So an example of this, in action is, I think constraints are incredibly efficient path of learning. So when we talk to early stage companies, I ask a lot and work with them a lot on who's your ICP, your ideal customer profile. But then almost always we're trying to shape down with constraints who we are building what for. Okay, it's mid-sized companies in what industry? It's for engineering teams. Do they already have AI experience? Do they not? Are they 5 people? Are they 50? What's the range? And so the theory of the case is, if you have all these constraints, then you can build something that's exceptional for that one group. And it's almost always the case you can expand from that group. So the first job is making these constraints that let you find something that's truly valuable to build for that group. Now, so one thing about this process, then these are almost always founder-led, or 1 or 2 or 3 co-founders. And then the next part is then learning how to scale yourself through leverage, how to bring in people that can do parts of that job. And I would argue that arc of figuring out what to do next, build something, and then scale it, like that's the whole arc of every professional career. You're trying to create something, and then create leverage for yourself so you can do something more, and the people that come in behind you. And that for me is both the individual learning and then the learning how to do that with people.
So there's a kind of like a way to bucket learning that I saw you talk about in another interview. It's actually why I asked you on. I thought it was quite insightful, just to think of it as either immersive learning or sort of learning as an active immersed participant versus learning as a kind of like passive participant.
Yep.
you're presumably, as a VC, you do a lot of learning more passively. Why is this a useful framework?
It's interesting. As a VC, I'm mostly actually an active learner. And let's give you these two examples. So for me, the active part is I have some constraints that I'm drilling in more deeply to understand, which customers want this product, or say it's in a board setting, what is our actual upsell motion, and how does that work, and when does it not work, and how do we measure it? And so by active, I mean I'm pushing into some set of facts, because I learn in that process. I'm trying to seek a fact. I'm also just trying to see, in that case, maybe what an entrepreneur understands to assess the business, or understand what the business is already doing to figure out whether it's doing it well, whether there's a problem, whether the people are competent. So that's what I call an active learning. You're driving somewhere. You might be doing it to create a company, to assess a person, or assess a business. The passive is something that also I do, but I feel like it's very different, and it's less common for me, though important. And that's where I want to have a conversation with many people. It's more exploratory. And let's say that you and I are talking about how you pick podcast guests and what your goals are and how you interact with them and how you design the pre-production, the post-production, the questions you're going to ask. And what I'm doing is, when I'm in that motion, is I'm not seeking an answer. I'm actively just trying. For me, I'm getting signal back from probably many conversations, and I'm building a framework in my head. A challenge for me in my passive learning is I almost can't tell you why the framework is coming out. I'm kind of talking to a bunch of people, and then I'll come back to my team and be like, I think there's a really big opportunity in rethinking how procurement and purchasing works. And I can tell you some reasons about Ariba and Coupa, which are the big procurement products, are pretty broken, and supply chains are shifting. So that's kind of interesting. And cost cutting is interesting. But I can't really tell you, but I've talked to a bunch of people about it, and I have a sense. And so that's what I mean by passive learning. The active part, I feel like that's what most of my job is, because I'm trying to actively figure something out. And the combination I saw, I always heard this attributed to Bill Gates, but I've seen many people do it with their executives. You got thousands of people or small founding teams. You'll see folks that can kind of have a bunch of conversations at kind of the high level, and then they'll kind of go all the way down. Well, tell me, how does this work? Why does it work? The 5 whys of why we've designed the product this way, or why does the design work in this form? And it's that combination of you're sitting at the service observing, and then ability to drill these sort of knowledge holes. I think it's the only way to do learning. We already talked about the importance of learning itself.
And it seems that, at least for you believe that there are people who have natural inclination to be able to learn passively more easily, and others who are able to learn actively more easily. Is that right?
I think about this more. Speaking of learners, I told you I'm doing something. Okay. The 7-year-old is a very good learner.
I'll say hi to her.
Okay. I'm doing an important thing. Good job. Good. Okay. Go downstairs. Go downstairs now. 1 second, Julian.
Take your time.
Okay. No, go downstairs. Okay. Hey, Julian, give me a moment, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, hey, listen. I want something important. Can you please go downstairs? Okay. Thanks. What? Okay. I feel like you're being kind of rude now. Okay. Just give me a minute. Sorry, Julie. Let's pick back up.
That's the life of working from home.
Yeah, exactly. And parenting. So we're lucky that the 7-year-olds aren't lighting fires. It's just instead of just wanting to be on the Zoom calls.
So okay, so my question was: are there people who have have you come across people who find it easier to learn passively and people who find it easier to learn actively? And then, like, should you be leaning into what your predisposition is, or should you be patching that up? What's the kind of like move around that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, whether with individuals like founders and people or companies themselves, is like, one is I think you have to know which mode you're in. Period. I think that goes a long way. And then secondly, I think you have to get good at get good at your level, your type of learning. And I think both of these ideas, I believe, you have to have like tools in the toolkit, but you might be better at some than others, or applicable in different situations. Again, for me, for example, I'm very bad at coming up with specific companies to go build, and we've built about 5-6 companies now here at XYZ. So my way of doing it is to be both a passive learner, where I'm trying to experience and talk to a lot of people about their problems. And that's like, I'm developing this framework, and then I become a very active learner. So take the example of climate. We've done a lot of work in climate, primarily my partner, Chauncey Hamilton. And we started that by just talking to a lot of people about what was going on in the climate ecosystem, whether there was businesses to be built, how people were making money, and just sort of observing that. That was the passive part. And that basically developed a framework that I believed you could make money in climate, originally on voluntary carbon credits, and now around tax credits in the US. So that was my view. And then the second view I had is a bunch of companies, not all, but a bunch of companies were primarily being successful through services dollars. We didn't have a repeatable motion. There were some notable companies that are mostly doing services. And so that's what I mean by, like, I was using a passive skill, which again, I'm not really great at, but so I'm slow to figure out this framework, but then I got a framework. And then I have a very active skill where I'm actively saying, like, given that, I need to find product companies that are specifically getting that are part of the new revenue stream around tax credits, and I can look at any given company, any given people. Do I believe they have a good approach? But I have these almost attributes that help me go into that system. The reason that this is then valuable is it also lets me both assess companies, maybe imperfectly, but also lets me articulate to limited partners, our investors, about what part of climate do we believe in, and also lets me sort of shut a bunch of doors of things that I don't believe. And that's helpful in my job and every job, because it tells you things not to worry about. I could be wrong. Maybe there's something, that's a great services company we should do, or some other element of this rubric that I boxed out. But that gives me actually sanity, so that I can do the thing that I am doing really well. And this attribute is what I see great founders are able to do, and they can get on one tool or the other based on their skill set, but then they can really lean into that tool. And usually, by the way, the culture of the company then reflects those skill sets of what they're good at. It might manifest into, here's how we work with customers, or here's how we market, or here are the kind of people that work here. But it's in my view, it's a manifestation of, like, what is our way of learning, and ultimately what is our way of winning.
One of the things that you seem to be bringing up a lot is the importance or the value of constraining the universe that you operate in. Yep. So let's say your fund, I think, does a lot of government adjacent tech, enterprise tech, and climate tech.
Yep.
And you don't look at anything else. Why is that the right move from a learning perspective? Like, what are the beneficial dynamics that 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 kind of give you exponential growth that come into play when you do that?
Yeah. So in my job, I would say there are two. I think you perfectly capture it. Thank you. And then I think there are two benefits. One is a personal benefit, which is I can sleep at night. Literally, like all of us, you're starting a company. You can start every company. Well, this is my rubric, so I'm going to start these kinds of companies, and you get down to this business. I can invest in every business. Well, I'm going to choose by stage, and then I'm going to choose by focus area. And again, some of this is so that you can sleep at night, because in theory, every option is available. And I do think that's important to sleep. But like that settling is important intellectually and otherwise as you go and execute your professional journey. Helps manage regret, etc. The second thing in my job, that specialization, that focus area, as you've described, means that I'm becoming an expert in that market. And sometimes that means I know a person, I know a customer, I know something about some artifact I can bring forward. Usually, though, what it means is I'm developing a feeling or a system about how to make money in climate, or in public sector work, which I care passionately about as both an opportunity to create business, as an opportunity to improve our society. I think procurement is the hardest part. So all I'm interested in are companies that have a view about how their products are able to get bought and deployed in the public sector. Many other things matter, but that focus, assuming you're right, is highly beneficial, because it means you're looking at the most important things about that business. It also means that when you see something that has a very clever solution to that very important thing, it's just super exciting. You're drawn right to it, versus everything kind of seeming the same and you can't figure it out because they're all kind of interesting companies. Something stands out much more so. And so that benefit of like one, having a settled mind or being able to deal with regret and all the weird things that go with starting companies and starting funds. And then secondly, the benefit of a focus, that you have hopefully a real insight about the companies you should work with and how those companies can function. That's highly beneficial.
Yeah, there's this part of Paul Graham, a really old Paul Graham blog post that I've been thinking about lately, which is where he says, like, the way to have good startup ideas is to be the type of person who has good startup ideas, right? And it seems to relate in a way to what you're saying, which is that if you become someone who can understand something, then when the information is presented to you, it's not like you're seeing the information, but the information is in fact revealing something you already knew, or kind of like it feels different, right? It's not like, is that the like one of the dynamics, or is that the most important dynamic?
I have two beliefs around this. One is that you can learn by doing. So the Paul Graham idea of someone says you be someone that can create startup ideas, you just start coming up with them. There's a lot of uncomfortability there, and there was a recent very clever video and idea from the NPR host of a very clever idea from an NPR host who talked about this idea called the gap. And the idea in the gap is you talk about creative people. Creative people, one of the reasons they're creative is they have good taste and they know what something good looks like. But when you're early in your career, you create things and you know it's below the bar of your good creative taste. And that's the gap. The gap is, you know what a great company idea is, and you know you don't have one, or this one is not one. And the journey in the creative space is just doing things, doing more, until over time, it could be a week, more commonly it's a whole lifetime, you get better at making things that are above that bar of taste, that are above that, this is a good idea. And I think getting on the message is just getting on the journey of closing that gap. The only way to do it is to just go and execute. So it's to generate new ideas. In my view, and I have some ways you do that, including ones we've talked about having constraints as you go through the searching process. You navigate the idea maze. But the only way to get better at that is just to do it, and then do it a lot. You then might create a company, which is a good company, but not a great company. You might even create a company that fails, which is a bummer. But in all cases, you're going through the process of creating something, or choosing something, or going through the efforts of choosing, and then one of those guys' ideas sticks and it goes this far. And, and I think that's what I think about, is how do you get executing and then closing this gap between what you believe is a big idea or a great idea or what have you, and what you can do right now, and you just execute your way through it.
I love the analogy, and I think what it reveals is the really important dynamic in the power of focus, as you say, which is like, you might know what something good looks like, but you can't do it yourself. Like, you might know what it's like to be really good at sales, yet, and when you see a good salesperson, like, wow, this is a great salesperson, yet you cannot do it yourself. And if you focus on that, then you can become, that level. And when you become that level, it's just a totally different world. It's not, it's not, the same to be. Let's say when I started my first business, the way that I did stuff was just totally, like, infinitely worse than I do today, because I've crossed that threshold of, being able to fulfill what I believe to be good. That's such a kind of like crisp, useful piece of advice.
Yeah, I think it was Ira Glass, the host of This American Life, that put it up just recently in this kind of clever, beautiful YouTube. We should share the link, and credit to him, because it's 2023, and someone finally wrote down, like, oh, that's a really good description of this experience to go through. I also think, because I've had those same experiences of you that learn by doing, and what I've seen, as you said, like running sales for the first time, one of the things is also that you discover, like, this is your way of doing it for you in your company. And number one, as a founder, I think that is a road you have to pave for your company. And then you can hire people that come in and can run your type of playbook. They might run it better or worse, but they can run your type of playbook. But a lot of the benefit of being a founder is that you go through the experience of paving what the path's going to be for the company. Because Dropbox goes to market very differently than Palantir did. But the understanding the founders went through is they went through that experience, and then they knew the kind of people they could hire behind them that could execute in their way. And that's advantageous. Everything from, like, who do you hire? How do you measure and account for that person? You can't know any of those things until you've done that work to some degree yourself, and then you can, I think, hire behind those activities, and that's what kind of gives you scale to grow. And that pattern shows up again and again in life, whether it's you're managing your board, or we have a company recently who's going great scale motion. They want to acquire a whole bunch of companies. Never done it before. I'm like, great, let's go acquire one. And let's actually make the CEO the lead on this, because they're going to realize all the things that are hard about it. And that's going to make the next bigger one we want to do so much easier, because they're going to have real lived experience in this pretty substantial business about how to assess the quality of the people in the company we're bringing in, how to design their packages, the real devils in the details. Because our theory is being great at acquiring companies is a skill that this business needs to have. And so this thing just continues your entire professional career, again, because it's a way of building new skills, new learning tools in the toolbox.
It is interesting. I've been thinking about this today, actually, where when you don't know how to do something, you think there are certain best practices that are the thing that people do.
Yep.
And eventually, once you learn enough about it, you realize that there are actually other best practices that might be a better fit for you. Maybe the sort of plain vanilla best practices are a fit for you. Maybe there are other ones that are a better fit. And an example for me is pitch decks. So I used to think you needed to create a pitch deck when you pitch VCs. And actually, there are people who create memos when they pitch VCs. I had no idea that was even a possibility or an option.
Yep.
And I am much more suited to writing a really compelling, investment memo than creating a pitch deck. And say, why have I spent 10 years creating pitch decks when I could have been writing a memo? And it's just but there's so many small things like that you realize through specialization and through becoming a true expert on something narrow.
Yeah, I'm smiling because it reminds me so much of one of my deepest learnings. Exactly as you said, let's take that example of like you're trying to ask for advice. Well, should I have a conversation? Should I do a pitch deck or should I do a memo? And the answer is like, nobody knows. I remember when we were running this company I'd started, and first couple board meetings, great board member, and I really thought they were just going to give us the answer. Like, we're trying to figure out this go-to-market thing, and they would just be like, well, here it is. We're going to tell you how that's done. And the answer is like, there is no answer. And at every level you go up, professionally, we're talking politically, like Obama didn't have the answer. Nobody has the answer. You're just going to make the best decision with the information you've got. And then exactly as you said, I've seen is then you develop your way of doing it. I actually get an immense amount of joy now that I can see us doing that. When I started XYZ, I started doing just me then, before my exceptional team came on. I was doing a quarterly call with my investors, my LPs, and running through a pitch deck. And I did not do an annual letter. I did not do a monthly email, but I did this. And even when I was doing it, because it fit my skill set, I could commit to a calendar invite. I get everybody in. I'm pretty good at pitch decks. I enjoy the dialogue. And I could tell when I was doing it the first time, if this works, this will just be how we update our institutional LPs. It'll be the way that we do it. I don't even know how other people do it. And now, years in, this is how we do it. And I enjoy when you could see that hints of it. Of, hey, we're going to organize our engineering team in this way, or we have a mechanism of promoting customers as being like onto a customer advisory board, or these are the people that we learn from, and here's how we iterate with them. You create all those patterns, and they could be super novel or they could be super traditional, but that process of how you do it, then your company does it, I think is really joyful to go figure out, because nobody knows. the right way to do it. It doesn't mean you can't learn from experts and how other patterns are done, or in my example, what's the information you want to share and have a good best practice there. You don't need to innovate everywhere, but it also means there's no right answer, just what you decide to do. And it might be the fastest, most effective way to do that at your scale.
So Ross, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you for the time. I want to do a call out to our audience to subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, to like this video so you can get more insight from true experts like Ross. As you can see, like, this isn't random dudes on the internet. It's really, Ross, you're a Midas list VC. One of the best, stamped by Forbes as one of the best in the world. And so please subscribe. Thank you to our production team, Jeremy, Schloke, and Brendan, for setting all this up. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions for our live stream. And Ross, thank you.
Thank you so much. Great.
So we're still on we're still live, and but that's the part that'll be clipped. But we're done. So and we're a little bit over. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. I really enjoyed the discussion as ever. It's this creation process, whether it's for podcasts or companies. I just think it really is. I love the creation process of everything. I now talk a lot. People are building their own funds, and they all have these different mechanics, how they work, choices, things you need to focus on. But just the creation process alone I find it so interesting. And also, like, a friend of mine was a director at Pixar for many years. And even talking to her about her creation process is wildly different, because the way of creating a story is so different from the systems you and I were talking about of creating, I think, because as engineers and frameworks. And even that's fascinating, like the creation, when it's like, well, the very different, she has very different starting points about where she begins her creation process. And I just find it a fascinating process.
It is amazing how, like, so my wife is a lawyer. She's a startup lawyer, and she works with a lot of startups. And obviously my business, it was like an enterprise business. So I spent a lot of time, in sales. Right? That's a lot of what you do. And that's mostly what she does too, is help enterprise businesses with contract. And it's crazy to me how all of her clients, they are all like very kind of like immersed in what they're doing. It's very kind of like hand-to-hand combat. Like, they think about it as like, oh, I've negotiated lots of deals and I'm a good deal maker, blah, blah. Well, for me, that's not how I think about it at all. I'm always like trying to find the system and trying to just like optimize, and where that led us, for dedicated, like we could sign, 100, 200K deals in a couple of days. Yeah. And like, we'd have, InfoSec reviews that get done in 30 minutes, just because we kind of like understood the process and we'd really mapped it out. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's the only good way of creating things. As you say, like, there are people who do like I highly doubt people in Hollywood operate in that way. But it is amazing how there are just different ways to come to get to the same place or to create things.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of this real briefly that I had with Erica. Is we were playing my 10-year-old son at the time, and he was playing with a bunch of Legos, and we're trying to figure out what to build. Started building some stuff, and I'm building kind of a framework, like, almost like a D&D journey in my head. Like, what's this object over here? Let's make him an axe, and all this stuff, kind of like starting to flush out the little Lego tools, and we're gonna go with. And Erica shows up, and she's a burst of energy, and she's like, "Who's this guy? where are they going? What are they doing? Let's get them there. And like, it's because she's a storyteller. So everything is not the minutia. Everything is like, let's begin the arc. And that kind of creativity is so different than my kind of creativity. And it's thrillingly different because it's rooted in these different set of assumptions, and even just how the training and how our mind works. And therefore, there's just some things that you can get to so rapidly that for example, like I need a framework, and then I can kind of no inputs, no expected outputs. I can deal with a bunch of systems in that way. But her ability to create these much faster, she can get like these creative arcs going because she has this very different tools in the toolbox. And I think it's really interesting to see hers executing this at just this tremendous level with all these Oscar-winning films and whatnot.
Have you found that your approach slowed you down in your early career because you needed to kind of like map out things before being able to do stuff, while others could just like, embed, like take in the environment and immediately execute, faster than you could?
Not. So I'm very good in the room at using my tools. So I can taking in information and building it into a framework, and then coming back very rapidly with that framework. So I'm good in the room about doing that. The challenges I would have are where I couldn't always understand how other people couldn't get my framework. I was using this example we were chatting earlier about the QA leader that I brought in. I was trying to how do we speed up engineering practice? How to be more responsive to the customer? We don't know if these product goals are going to change. Let's build flexibility into our system. And what that person was interpreting was like all this was pain for them. All this was the variability is going to make their life not just harder, like they're lazier, but I was going to hurt people because they would have to deal with this uncertainty. And I have a kind of blind spot for that, where I'm like, how can people not see what's the framework that makes sense? And so that's the weakness that I have, and need to at times be attentive to bringing people along with, because I'll get surprised because they don't see it the way I do. And I use this example because they saw the opposite, and I'm like, oh, why don't you get it? But like they saw this as being counterproductive and hurting both them and hurting the product as well.
And what do you need to communicate to them? You need to communicate the value for them, or what do you need to say that's different?
To stick in that example, I think number one, I'm not sure that person would have ever communicated it. It could have been part of that discussion. And that doesn't mean they're bad, but like they were just not there for this level of change. And so maybe that was a dialogue to have in a different room. And the best thing you could do is not give that to people. I think we've maybe all experienced this with their engineers that are incredible. But if you're talking about varying the features or changes, they can just feel the pain of like, well, I don't know what to write, or worse, you're just going to stack in more story points to me, and I can't deliver. And so they don't want to be there for that variation process. And so I think that's some of the lesson, like whether or not someone is good at that particular skill set is an important one. And then the second is, I think, just being also aware of how you describe the systems, the way you can describe it as a benefit to them or to bring anybody else along. And so, this would be where you can explain maybe a product very differently to a customer, to a salesperson, to an engineer, and similar. And that way, you're going to be more versatile and maybe simply said, understanding your audience. We talk about this all the time in venture. It's different explaining to one venture person your company, different from three, different from a whole partnership, and because of the degree of depth you can go to. It's different in the first meeting where I want to hook you in 2 slides. So I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you. And it's exciting. I'm going to tell you it in detail, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you again. Like kind of that process. As an example, like how do you do those things really effectively to one person versus three versus a partnership? You just got to know your audience. And,
I will let you go. As I know this is so interesting to me, but I don't want to rob your family of time with you.
Julian, it's a great pleasure as always. I'm excited for all the future podcasts, all the future guests, and all the future companies you're going to make.
Yeah, we'll publish this next Wednesday if that works for you, and I'll send you text you can kind of copy paste and adjust and do whatever, and then clips and all that for your own accounts.
Thank you.
Does
so
that
much.
Timing work for you?
That's terrific and really appreciated.
Bye, and such a pleasure to meet.
Yeah.